Hey, welcome back to the Eagle Insight Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Kashima Garcia, who is a doctor of strategic leadership and an expert in organizational culture and human capital strategy. Kashima is also an Air Force veteran and a wonderful human being. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Bob. It is my pleasure to be on the podcast and talk about what we are going to talk about today.
Well, I would love to talk about strategic leadership since you are well versed in that, having just completed your PhD program and are now officially a doctor. I have been in the strategic leadership realm in uniform and then as an executive coach, but I'm not sure that I understand the distinction between strategic leadership and what everybody else just calls leadership. And I would love to pick an expert's brain on that specific thing.
Thank you. That is an amazing question, especially because I feel like leadership is put into a general category when it comes to a lot of things, and it's almost like it's overused a lot of the time. Managers are not leaders. Managers are managers. But now when it comes to specific, well, actually, managers can be leaders, but it really depends. But when it comes to strategic leadership, it is about being intentional. It's about a specific task, making sure that the strategy that you are trying to accomplish has the right people in place to do those things.
I think that intentionality is really important, and it has to live within a context of a strategy or a vision for the organization as well.
Absolutely. Right. It absolutely does. When the organization has that strategy in place and they have the vision of what they're trying to do, then it makes it a lot more easier for them to say, okay, these are the key players that we need to get those things done. And now what the strategic piece comes in is obviously it's time bound, it's time phased. You have that goal in mind, that vision. And it's not always going to be an easy thing to do. And so once again, come back to right people in the right positions, getting the things done.
Yeah, I think right people, right seats is something that Jim Collins said it first, and everybody's repeated it ever since. I think there's very few things that are more strategic than getting the right people, and then bringing them together to work as a team to achieve a common goal. So how do you advise leaders in organizations on how to put the right people in the right seats? It's like, it's easy to say, and I think really difficult to do.
It is absolutely difficult to do, especially when people who are doing things, we can do things and be good at it. But can we do things and be great at it? Can we do things and be natural at it? And so I think that when it comes to assigning the right people to the right roles, it has to do with their aptitude, attitude, their natural skills, because then it won't feel like an excess or extra thing to do. Now, as far as organizations go, sometimes maybe the leader themselves may have to take a step back and say, well, am I in the right role? Am I leading the people appropriately? And that has to be a very humble conversation. And sometimes that needs to be broken down. Because if we're trying to get to a goal and it's not happening in a timely manner, the real question is are you leading your team appropriately? And sometimes that could be a heartburn, and you know about that because you've done it all the time.
It's a tremendously hard question for leaders to ask themselves. In fact, they're much better off having somebody else ask the question.
Absolutely. Right. Someone who's from the outside, who doesn't have as much investment in the organization, who can really help to reframe the problem is probably the best way to say it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hope that's true because I make a living doing that as an executive coach, asking hard questions. But I think that is the hardest question. The one that you just posed is, as a leader, am I doing the things that I need to be doing to be able to maximize the value of the people that are on my team?
Absolutely. There's a great saying. It says, you don't have to do everything. You just have to get everything done. In fact, I think I heard it from you, Bob.
It sounds like something I'd say, but I'm sure I was quoting somebody I'd read. But the idea of leading by, with, and through other people, right? This is particularly more newer leaders, but well, I don't know if that's even fair to say. I think there's plenty of people who have been leading for long periods of time that still don't know how to let go.
I like how you say that. And I think that sometimes where you have adopted your leadership skills, because some people are natural leaders and other people can learn how to lead. And sometimes it depends on the industry that you work in that would role model those behaviors for you. But I would always say that not every person is going to be the right person in every situation. And that's important to know. So that self-awareness is key to stepping back and saying, do I have the skills? Do the people on my team have the skills? What am I looking at? What are we trying to accomplish? What is the strategy?
So the self-awareness piece is so critical, and I think it goes back to the root of your first question: is am I leading in a way that maximizes value for the people that are working for me? And if I'm not self-aware, I'm probably going to answer, yeah, sure, of course I am. I'm doing all the things that I'm supposed to be. I go to all the meetings. I tell people what to do.
I don't think I think that if someone who doesn't want to get feedback from their subordinates is probably not the greatest leader out there, because how do you know how you're doing? How what is your pulse check? How do you know you were heading in the right direction? How do you know that you are leading your team the way they want to be led? And sometimes we come back to it can be situational, but when you have an opportunity to intentionally impact the mission, if you will, then that means that your intention also comes to understanding what your best skills are. And if you don't have those skills, then a leader will know to get the people who do, because you don't have to get everything done yourself. You have to make sure the job gets done.
It's so important to keep that in mind, right? As a leader, that I was sitting in a planning session with a team, a leadership team, and they were looking at all of the stuff that had to get done. And this new leader had just joined the team, and they saw their name going up against a whole bunch of things that they were going to be accountable for. And they're like, there are just not enough hours in the day for me to do all of my normal individual contribution stuff and get all of this other stuff. And everybody else on the team looked at him and said, you don't have to do it yourself. You just have to be accountable to it.
Absolutely.
And the look on their face was like, really? What do you mean? I was like, what? But they were a new leader and they didn't see that concept naturally, that just because it is under your purview or under your authority or your accountability doesn't mean that you have to do it. It means you have to make sure that it gets done, and that there are many ways to get those things done. And I always, the three top things is delegate, automate, or outsource, right? How am I going to get somebody else or something else to do the things that need to get done? Because fundamentally, I think one of the best leadership traits that I have is my laziness. Because
Unpack that.
I don't want to do a lot of individual contributing stuff. I'm not really all that great at it. So I'm lazy. I'm going to find an easier way. I'm going to find somebody else to do something. I'm going to have systems in place. I'm going to build systems to help run themselves so that everybody knows what they need to get done. They know how they're going to be graded on that. What is the standard? How am I going to be graded against this standard? Those are the top two things that people want to know.
You'll be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't. Transparency was one of the number one things that a lot of individuals complain about within their organization. They had no clue how they were being graded in regards to their performance. They didn't know if they were doing good. They didn't know if they were doing bad. When promotion time came around, I don't understand how I didn't get that promotion. Or maybe I don't understand why I didn't get that pay raise that, so-and-so got, and I work harder than them. And I will probably say that it's a two-way street, because iron sharpens iron. If you've had a good leader in your career, whatever your career is, then you kind of know what those things are supposed to look like. So if your leader doesn't do the things that they're supposed to do, because I feel like we got to empower people on the other side too, right? Mm-hmm. If your leaders are not doing what they're supposed to do, sometimes you have to help them understand how to lead you.
Absolutely. the power of delegation is one of those things that I think so many leaders struggle with. And when I say delegate, it's not just giving people a list of stuff to do that you don't want to do, you want to get off your plate, right?
Right.
This is how you get to grow your team in their
Mm-hmm.
capabilities. So when you delegate something, you give somebody a responsibility. Now you're still accountable for that. You have to make sure it gets done, and you're going to hold them accountable for what you've assigned. But if you've done this right, you've picked a person who can get it done and could probably do it as good or better than you, or will learn to do so if you'll resource and train them. And that's the key. Is you can invest the time on getting those folks up to snuff on that particular task, and they're growing as individuals, they're growing as leaders. You have less to do.
Mm-hmm.
All right, this is a win for the organization.
I think when we have people problems. And sometimes as people, we forget that it's okay. It's okay to give people an opportunity, but they'll go, well, what happens if they leave? Well, what happens if they stay?
Right.
That is the age old question that comes around when leaders are questioning how much resources that they should give to their team. If we are all focusing towards the mission, all trying to get something done, and we don't have the resources or the capability, then I will start as a subordinate. I will start questioning my purpose. What am I here to do? Should it be this hard? And so another thing that leaders have to do is they have to manage expectations by doing those things that you mentioned earlier. And I'm not saying to make the road easier, but definitely to make the path calm, right? By putting purpose in an intent in the pathway and saying, okay, this is what we are doing. There's this one story that I've heard, and it had to do with someone who was walking on a path all the time, not having any idea why they were going to work. And I think someone had, once again, I think this story came from you. I'm not 100% sure. We've had some great conversations. And the guy said, well, do you know what we're building? Right? And he says, well, we're building a cathedral. A cathedral. There
Right.
we go. A cathedral. That is important. When you have individuals who are working on the task, but they don't understand how important these tasks are, how does it lead to the bigger mission? What is the reason why they are doing the job? You are not just a cog in the wheel. Because when it gets clogged, what happens, right?
So I love that story. That's Sir Christopher Wren. He was the royal architect rebuilding St. Peter's Cathedral in London after the Great Fire. And there was the three guys there. One of them just said he's laying bricks, and the other said he's building a wall, and the third guy said he was building a cathedral. And Sir Christopher was like, okay, this is the right guy. He gets it. He sees the big picture. Now, when I first heard that story, I thought it was my job as a leader to make sure that the brick builder, the bricklayer, and the wall builder also understood they were building the cathedral. You are part of this bigger picture. And I do think it's my job to tell them that, but it's not necessarily my job to turn that bricklayer into a cathedral builder.
Absolutely.
And I thought it was, because maybe perhaps it was part of this military mentality of up or out. But it was like, well, if you're a private, you want to be a sergeant. If you want to be a sergeant, you want to be a first sergeant. If you want to be a first sergeant, you want to be a sergeant major. This is how the military mindset, which is, I think, largely a bureaucratic mindset, that everybody has to be a leader and everybody has to want to move forward. And it took me quite some time to realize that there are people out there who would love to be a bricklayer and be good at being a bricklayer and get paid to be a bricklayer, but don't try to make me into something I'm not.
Absolutely. I think that is a difficult thing, especially depending on the industry that you work in, where the expectation is that I grow this way. This is what the path looks like. But it comes back to that self-awareness. You know what? But I really like laying bricks. Like, this is not what
Right.
I want to do. And I think it's okay to say that. It's okay to say, I am not a cathedral builder. I am a bricklayer. because I feel like the respect will go, it goes both ways. And saying, this is my best bricklayer. There is this concept that I have been running with for a while, and it's called Lead Where You're Planted. And the idea of that is saying, as you were using the story of the bricklayer, is saying, hey, look, this is my job. And if this is my job, then I'm going to do the best at it. I will have an understanding of what the big picture is because I understand my job, but I'm not going to try to take over the big picture, right? Because if I am not doing my job, then who is? If I am leading where I'm planted, then I'm encouraging other people around me with that same purpose that may have been influenced in me. I am doing what I'm supposed to do. And somebody is watching, So I always think there's this thing, Big Brother is always watching, but someone is watching. Whether it's the person who's next to you, whether it's the next generation of individuals coming up behind of you, they are paying attention. And if you're leading where you are planted, whether it's something that is a stepping stone or whether this is where you're going to be, then it makes it a lot more easier to acknowledge the purpose in your work.
Absolutely, and you're right. People are always watching, and it's they're trying to figure out who you are. Are you the person that you say you are? Right, but they're not watching your mouth. They're watching your feet, right? They where are you going? What are you doing? How do you actually perform, as opposed to what you say you're capable of doing? And so people are consistently checking your mettle to see if you are everything that you pretend to be. And a lot of times we find ourselves, wondering: is anybody even notice? Hey there, leader. Yes, they do.
Wait until you do something wrong. That's when you'll notice that they've noticed.
They've noticed. Yeah. Yeah, they'll absolutely let you know. Now, if you're wondering whether or not people are noticing you because you never get feedback from your superiors or from your peers or somebody that might work for you, that's going to infringe on your self-awareness, as you alluded to earlier. It's like, how do we become more self-aware? Mm-hmm. And those feedback loops are incredibly important.
Mm-hmm. It is incredibly important, especially when it's not always in a formal manner. So you have people come into your office, of course they're going to be on, right? But the feedback that matters most are the ones that happen in the informal settings as well. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying not to have formal feedback sessions, but I'm talking about when you pass someone because you happen to be at the coffee machine at the same time, or maybe you're all both heading to the bathroom. This is where people are getting that opportunity to see who you are, get an understanding of your character, and not always feel like they have to be on 100% of the time. I think sometimes we take for granted the value of feedback. I personally love it when I am on my way to someone else's office and someone stops me and says, "Hey, I just want you to know that something that you said last week really resonated with me." And those are what I work for. I work for those type of points because that makes a lot of sense to me. I go, "Oh, good. I did a good." Now, don't get me wrong. I do like to get paid as well, but
Right.
but it does help when you have a conversation and whatever you were trying to get done, someone comes and says, "You hit the nail on the head. It really resonated with me. I'm continuing this conversation. This is amazing." I feel like if leaders are doing that, then they're continually growing. And that's what life is. Like, you don't know everything. You're not going to know everything. But if you continue to grow and have a learning mindset, then it might be a little bit more easier to understand the people you have in your organization and the purpose that they have to get the job done.
Well, so you're talking about a growth mindset of you're not done getting better yet. I love that statement. I'm not done getting better yet. And for somebody my advanced age, like, yeah, just a little bit older than you, Kashima, but to say that I'm in my mid 50s and I'm not done getting better yet. But I heard that first from somebody who's in his late 60s who said, "I'm not done getting better yet." And I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, of course. Of course. And so when you have people in your organization who do feel like they're done getting better, like they've arrived, they're there, they are the epitome of whatever it is that you're doing. They're the best bricklayer there's ever been. I have some concerns. Like, are they really that good that they don't have to stay on top of their game? They don't have to work at it. Because in most cases, the answer is no. So how do we help instill that growth mindset in the people that we lead and make it part of our culture and our organizations?
Well, I want to take a step back and say there are 5 different generations in the workforce right now,
Yeah, there are.
right?
Yeah.
And even though the traditionalists are still there, they work because they want to, mostly not necessarily because they have to. The people who have to, um, it probably wasn't in the original plans. And so I say that to say that there is always someone who's coming up behind of you who's hungrier than you,
Oh, yeah.
who is going to be more aware than you, who is going to leverage technology more than you. YouTube University is real, right?
Oh, yeah.
And who is going to be a little bit more educated than you, but they won't have the experience that you have, but they will have a step ahead than what you may have had when you were at their age. So I do think that there is that awareness of being a little bit better because, I mean, if you're competitive, that is, right? And if me saying being competitive, not for the promotion, but competitive to keep your job.
Yeah.
Because there are always going to be a bricklayer out there. But what makes you be the best bricklayer that we want to have on our team? You had a choice, right, to work for this organization. And the organization had a choice to have you work for the organization as well. What kind of employee are you going to be? What kind of leader are you going to be? What kind of influencer are you going to be? What kind of person are you going to be? And is this the type of person that the organization would like to have amongst their ranks? That's just, I come back to the awareness piece of that because I think that's a very impactful statement. Now, as far as the organizations being aware of the individuals that they have and being prepared for that to kind of help with that development piece, I would say, we have to once again come back and be intentional. If First of all, the value proposition of each individual is going to be different. What brought me to the organization might not be what makes me stay. Maybe I am the best bricklayer, but you know what? But I saw the tile guy over there, and I think that maybe I want to try out tiling. But if my work ethic is there, is that something that the organization would be willing to invest in me? I know I'm kind of like dancing around that piece, but I think I got some thoughts going on in your mind.
You do. I say, one of the things that you mentioned in there is the competitiveness, which is a really good trait when appropriately applied. At other times, it becomes a real distraction when I'm so worried about the competition. Am I going to get the promotion? Or are they going to get the promotion? That I forget that they're my teammate.
Right.
And then if this organization is going to be successful, I need to make sure my teammate is successful. And if I'm so worried about being competitive with them, I'm probably not doing the best teammate sort of things that would make everybody better off. And so that's a double-edged sword, this competitiveness. I want people who are hungry. I want people to have ambition. I want them to drive. But I don't want them to do that at the expense of the organization and for the team and the culture. So I sat next to a woman on a plane about a month ago, and she mentioned that she was feeling threatened by this up-and-comer who was the generation behind. And the woman I was talking to actually was one of the founders of the company. So she was a partner, a shareholder, and a founder. So her position was secure, but she ended up working so hard to try to stay ahead of this woman who was coming up behind her. And I thought that was really interesting because she was saying it in the context of, I don't have enough time to spend with my family. And I asked her, I said, well, why is beating this youngster so important to you right now? Well, I've got this pride and I'm so competitive. And I'm like, oh. So you're telling me it's your ego that is making you work this hard when what you really want to do is spend time with your 7-year-old and your 5-year-old. And I'm trying to figure out if your ego is more important than the time that you would spend with your 5-year-old and your 7-year-old. And she said, no, it's not even close. I said, okay, but you're not acting that way. because you've let your competitive spirit get in the way of it. And oh, by the way, I'm willing to bet there are things that you haven't shared with that person that you feel threatened by that would make her job easier or would make her a more effective member of your team because you're feeling so competitive about it.
Mm-hmm. I like how you bring that up because I feel like that competitiveness, like it can work for you, it can work against
Right.
you. In this situation, it was working against her, where she could have been like, "Hey, I see. I think it's good to know that there are other people who may have other skills than you that you would like to develop, and like lean into that competitiveness and say, well, how do you do that? Right? Like you said, it's for the betterment of the team. So you're now seeing something that someone else brings to the team, and you go, wow, I admire that, and I would like to be like that. And by the way, here are a few things that I have that in my toolbox as well. Would you like to learn? I think there's a lot of things that come to asking that very simple question of, you know, I mean, because competitiveness is going to be natural for some people, but the awareness of how you use your competitive edge would be the critical piece, is what you're explaining.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I did ask her, I said, do you have other senior leaders that mentor people within your organization? Oh yeah, yeah, we kind of mentor different people. I'm like, oh, if you could turn your competitive side into being the best mentor for that person that you feel threatened by, how would that change how you approach her every day? How would that change with your relationship with this person you feel threatened by? Rather than being threatened by it, perhaps you would start to see it as a relationship where the two of you are now a superpower together and
Right.
you are starting to create value that other people can't create. Now, you could be the best mentor and be competitive in that space, and everybody's going to win.
Absolutely.
And then she told me she owed me for the session during our 45-minute plane ride. We were just talking, but I feel like there's lots of things that contribute to an organization's culture. Competitiveness is potentially one of them, depending on how the senior leaders in the organization treat each other and how they compete across different divisional boundaries, for example.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in operations, you're always going to have some sort of friction with sales. And if you're in sales, you have friction with marketing, right? Those are natural friction spaces. But in an unhealthy organization, you're going to see that competition between those different portions, those different functions within the company. It's going to be unhealthy. Like, I don't care if sales is successful as long as operations is successful.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what a great way to destroy your company.
Easily, easily. Because I feel like for business owners, and for leaders alike, if you understand the value that each position brings to the team, you understand the value that each division or office group, department brings to the team, and putting them against each other does not help the team.
Right.
It hurts the team. And it's an unfortunate thing because we see this happen more often than not, where operations is put against uh, HR. I feel HR is always going to be the sad group that people don't care about, even though they are behind making sure that the machine stays oiled.
Yeah, I think it's a toss up between HR and IT who gets hated on the most. But
You know what? I feel like IT gets a little bit more love, but yes, they have been talked about. We've looked at the blogs. Um, IT, they, when something happens, you got to put in a ticket, change your password. Did you do your updates? But all these things are critical to get operations the things that they need so they can do the job, right? And as a leader, it is important for us to help ensure that we reframe that conversation and stop those negative talks, if you will, because how are we still working towards the bigger picture? I've actually seen where organizations will, they have to take a little bit of time and say, hey, look, I think that we should do some cross work where we take someone out of one position and kind of for the day be able to shadow and get some things done. If you could do it for a little bit longer than that, even better, because then they can truly understand that they're just not out there to hurt you. For the IT folks, right? IT is actually trying to make sure that all systems are up. And that there's no compromise. HR is trying to make sure that if something does happen, that it does not pose a risk and liability against the organization. Finance and accounting, I mean, they just don't sit back there and count the money. Um, they have to make sure that the things are moving. So when those requests come in and the organization wants to grow, that everybody gets paid. That's the most important piece to me, I feel like. But of course, the organization needs money to run as well. But the moment that someone doesn't get paid, it is impactful.
It's huge. Yeah. So all of the systems are necessary. And when we start setting up our stovepipes and you put a leader in charge of that, you're in charge of operations, you're in charge of project management, you're in charge of some other function. And those leaders spend all of the time looking down within their organization and leading them, and maybe leading them in a fantastic way, but they don't recognize that to their left and their right, that's the team that's most important. You're so busy looking down and building the team below you that you forget that you are a member of a team called that leadership team in that organization. And that if you're not the one reaching across those boundaries to make sure that they're not stovepipes, you have to make sure that everything that the other organizations need that come from you are coming across top notch, because the stuff you need from them needs to be that way, and that's your expectation.
Right. Relationship management is huge. I think another best practice that organizations do during their onboarding process when they bring on new leaders that join the leadership team is they ensure that these leaders outside of the organization that they're going to be overseeing, that they're going to be aligning with the other departments, with the other teams. Because if they don't understand what they do, they may not understand how they complement. And so you were saying that, and it's very complementary to the point of being a leader, because a leader understands the people to their left and their right, because we're trying to get something done. And if I don't know what you're doing and how you impact me and how I impact you, could I be honestly hindering the passage here?
And I think there's a natural tendency for a lot of us to assume the worst in other people. So, particularly if you have a contentious budget process, and like, well, no, I want to do some extra R&D or do some extra hiring in my division, right? I've got to do it at the expense of somebody else, and so I'm going to go make my case and go fight for that. And you hear about that, the budget fight, right?
Right.
And it's such an unhealthy way of looking at how an organization has to run.
Right.
One of the most brilliant accidents I ever had as a leader was I had to fill the role of the director of project management in an engineering firm, and I just needed to fill it temporarily, and I thought it was only going to be maybe a month or maybe 2 months, and it ended up being 6 or 7 months. But to fill that temporarily, instead of bringing somebody from the outside, I took my operations chief, who was always contentious about the people over there in project management. And I took my operations chief and I put him in charge of project management for what I thought was only going to be a month or two, and ended up being a while. And at first he was like, yeah, I can't wait to get over there and tell those guys what's what, get things straightened out. And what he found over there was a bunch of really great professionals doing their best. And he would look back over his shoulder at his organization that he was going to go back to over in operations and say, those guys aren't making it any easier on these project managers.
Right.
And these project managers are really trying hard. Now, there's some stuff that they can do better for sure. But, I'm getting a pretty good view of there's stuff that operations can do better as well. And so I would say that if I've stumbled into a successful practice that I would repeat every single time is when you have the opportunity to have somebody sit in a different seat to get that different perspective. I would do it every time.
Right. And I think that's why it's important for leaders to be intentional about who they interact with, right?
Yeah.
Make it a part of your schedule. Make it a part of your daily duty to speak to someone that doesn't work in your direct organization or your direct chain, you would be surprised about the information that you will get and learn just by interacting with people. There's that positional and personal power, right? I think I would prefer to follow someone that I respect as a person than follow someone that I respect because of the position. And so when you were talking about how they're individuals who are in place, right, and they're using their superpower, I come back to, well, which one was that? Is it the superpower of authority, or is it the superpower, that natural charisma, and sometimes even when it's not natural, but it is intentional and it's consistent, because someone is watching you.
It's interesting you bring up charisma, because I think there's an idea that great leaders have to be charismatic, and there are some very non-charismatic leaders who have been fantastic leaders.
That's because they're self-aware.
They are.
They know what they bring to the table.
And they have capabilities. They know how to connect with people, but maybe they're not the extrovert that's going to get up in front of a crowd and give a rousing speech. But they know what to do, and they know where the organization is going, and they know how to communicate to people. This is what the standard is. Here's how you're doing against the standard. And oh, by the way, here's what your future in this company looks like. And if you give people those three things, they are going to be so far ahead, and they are going to understand what to do, where to go, and how to do it. That's the transparency you're talking about.
Right. Set me up for success.
Yeah. Now, Kashima, all of this stuff is akin and part of organizational culture, and that's kind of where your superpower is helping people see their organization and how the culture is affecting how it performs. So, tell me, how do you go about assessing a culture within an organization?
So, first I want to differentiate the difference between culture and climate, because sometimes people get those things confused. Because the culture is longstanding. It has been embedded in the foundation for over some time, where the climate can change and it's a lot more quicker. And it can change depending on the person who is in a leadership position. Right? If that person is changing, that position is changing people in a consistent manner, like every 2-3 years, then the climate will change every so often. But there's still some behaviors that are just rooted in the culture, right? And so those are the things that we're trying to change. You had mentioned bureaucracy before. That we're trying to change bureaucracy, but being aware of these bureaucratic behaviors and processes are also important in understanding an organizational culture. What do we want our organization to do? First of all, we want to be able to accomplish whatever the mission is, whether it's a private sector, whether it's a government sector, whether it's in a public sector, or any other industry. The point is that what we are trying to accomplish requires people. And when you have people problems, because people help create and maintain the culture.
They do, but leaders have a responsibility, I think, for, I don't know what the right word is, governing the culture, influencing the culture, guarding the culture, protecting the culture.
Right. And you know what? And leaders are people too. Leaders are people too. And because of that, their biases can come into understanding how they are leading, guiding, executing, making happen the culture, right? And that's where I come back to the self-awareness piece is, are you aware of your biases? Are you aware of your strengths? Are you getting that feedback in how the organization is actually being run? Or are you, staying at the helm, not realizing that the boat is sinking? Or are you in the engine room and not, steering the ship? So you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Because I absolutely agree. Leaders are that impact. They are the eyes, they are the ears. They are making sure that the organization is running as a well-oiled machine. It is not an easy feat. It is not an easy job indeed, but it is one that needs to be given attention to and intentionality, because if we don't, then anything can happen. And if it comes out of nowhere, is it because it came out of nowhere, or did you not see it coming?
Oh, you've just been ignoring it, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's one of those blind spots. So I think there's a huge role for accountability here, right? When you're protecting the culture, like we have a winning culture, we have a high performing company, and we have a winning culture, and we have people who are not living that. They're not performing at the level that is expected of them. They may have behavioral issues, or just don't want to meet the standards, or can't meet the standards. If leaders don't address that, if they're not holding those people accountable, then your culture is going to erode.
Right. A few weeks ago, I did a presentation for Disrupt HR. Was pretty awesome organization. We bring in topics, and that topic was very much brought up, right? Where organizational culture was huge. Before, a few years ago, around COVID time, we're talking about diversity and inclusion. Now we're talking about organizational culture. This happened right after the Great Resignation.
Hmm.
Do you remember that?
I do. Yeah.
Do you remember that? And so people go, for those who are not aware of what the Great Resignation was, people would look at the organization that they were working in and says, well, I don't really feel that the organization is meshing with my values. Or maybe the pressure isn't there. And I come back to, when you have people, which your organization is made of, you have people problems. A lot of the times we hear from leaders saying, well, I don't know, these people over here, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. I would go in and I'd be like, I want to hear what they're saying, right? The
Right.
comment section is where it's at. I want to go onto your Glassdoor account. I want to go on to the profiles where people get to speak about your organization, because that's when the angry people talk. Angry people don't talk unless they're upset, and
Right.
they're upset for a reason. Now the question is it true? Right? And so there's a little bit of truth that comes in having the people who are negatively impacting your organizational culture. My question would be, is what happened, and how did, and why is it still happening, to the point of why are they still on your team, and have you fixed that problem? Because does it have the potential of happening again?
Yeah, there's all sorts of issues with that, right? Is did somebody do something that would adversely affect the culture, and you didn't hold them accountable? So now you've got two problems. You've got a leader who doesn't hold people accountable, and you've got the original problem of whatever behavior is causing a problem with yours. I think the bigger problem is that leader. That leader who's allowing, it's the you get what you tolerate, and if you're going to tolerate that crappy behavior, or that poor performance, or the mediocre uh, values, then you're going to get a mediocre culture.
Right. It's going to have a ripple effect. And other people are going to see that, because they're basing their performance not only on the things that they do, but how you as a leader react to the things that they do, and how you react to the things that other people do. I would say the best sign and the greatest sign of a leader is how they handle adversity. And so if this has been happening for some time, it has been impacting your culture, and nothing has been done, that's not good.
And when you don't do something about it, leader, people notice that. And so
Absolutely.
you lose credibility as a leader because you allow that to take place. And you've heard people say this, like, I would not want to work in a company that would tolerate that kind of behavior.
Right.
Like, ooh, ooh. So if the wrong people stay, then the right people are going to leave.
Right. And 'cause they start to question everything.
They do.
They start to question, do you see the value that I bring to the team? Because I am working hard. I am doing the things. I am meeting the quote unquote expectations according to the performance standards that you have set for me. But here is someone doing 50% less the work than I am, coming in with a little bit more attitude, doing a lot less of the quality that you are expecting of me. Then the one day that I am not the way that I'm supposed to be, something's wrong with me.
Mm.
And I mean, so we can see how it does become a one bad apple spoils the bunch.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said at the opposite end of that too. Is when you have hyper performers. Sometimes you have people who are really really great at whatever their niche is, and often happens in sales. Like this person can sell the heck out of anything. It doesn't matter what it is, and instead of being a great team member, they're arrogant. They're egotistical. They're demeaning to people. They don't treat your other employees with dignity and respect. And leaders will look at that and go, I know it's really bad the way they treat other people, but gosh, that guy sells more widgets than anybody.
They perform.
And do you realize how much money they make us? And
Right.
they talk a good game, these leaders, about how much we respect our culture and we respect our people. And they'll look you in the eye and say people are our most important asset. But then you're going to allow them to be treated poorly
Hmm.
because this guy's a high earner.
Hmm.
Ooh. Hey, leader, that's probably exactly what it felt like to work at Enron right before they crashed.
True. This is
Yeah.
100% true. It's not an easy thing to do, and that's where we come back and we leverage the other departments, because you go, oh, but that person's our best performer. So you mean to tell me that you will die on your sword for one great performer, but what about the 20 other people who work for you, right? That are not being their best selves because that one person may be bringing down the team, and you are over here watering that flower or cactus, whichever one you want to
The
use.
prickly cactus. So when I think about organizational culture, when I think about culture in general, I think the leader has such an important role of not tolerating adverse behavior that's going to detract from that culture, and it's got to be independent of how valuable that employee is to the bottom line, because
Right.
your culture is going to create bigger and better bottom lines than just this one performer is. There's nobody in your organization that's irreplaceable.
Right. What is that reputation that the organization has? And that reputation can be trending. It can help people want to work with the organization. And it could say to people, well, I don't want to work with people like that, especially if you're in the services industry where you are doing things and it's task oriented and whatever the case is. Um, and if your consumers or your providers, they don't agree with the values, they question all those things, and I think you should question it too as a leader. Are we executing the values and beliefs, or are they just the things that we put on the wall, or we put in our handbooks? We say that yeah, we're a great organization, but we don't follow the policies that we have actually created and incorporated for ourselves because we are tolerating bad behavior. And then I almost would say, is it this person who is a high performer? That's amazing. But are you using the tools that you have in your organization to communicate that? And at what point do you say, hey, look, you're probably costing me more money in the long run than you are saving me more money? Because that one person who you think is helping the bottom line can honestly be the liability that the organization has and take the majority of the company with them.
Yeah, I think when the very first time that arrogant salesperson treats somebody poorly, and a leader doesn't step in and say, whoa, 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 whoa. I get that you've made a few sales here, but we don't do that.
Right.
That's not how we treat each other here. And if that's the way you treat other people, you're going to have to go do that someplace else. Now, if this is a one off, no problem.
Right.
Go make your apologies, and then we'll move on from here. But if you want to treat people like that, you're going to have to do it elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
If you
And that's
start from the beginning like that, I think you're going to be okay.
You do. I want to circle back to the Great Resignation because people realized that organizations tolerated a whole lot more than they should have. And they went, but you're not standing up for me, right?
Right.
You're not doing that. You're not having the values and beliefs that I have. I get treated not so well, and you treat this person like that. And when you have a bunch of people who decide, because now you have a little bit of an opportunity to think, the world went on a pause for a second and they go, well, is this the life that I really want to live? Is this a job that I really want to have? And those are the thoughts that were going through their mind. Does the organization stand up for me? Does the organization do the things for me? And I mean, and of course, people leave bad managers, not organizations, and bad leaders. They leave bad leaders. But those are the people who are leading the organization.
Yeah. Yeah. If you care so little about me and you care so little about the culture, why in the world should I bring my discretionary effort to you?
Right.
And so maybe I'll stick around long enough till I can find another job, but that's about it. And they're
And
certainly not
quietly
going to do
quit.
yeah, they're not going to do anything extra for you. That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So you brought up COVID. There's a lot of people who had a lot of time to think about a lot of different things, and one of the things that emerged during that time period was this entire movement about diversity,
Right.
and it got lumped in diversity, and then equity and inclusion, and there was it became so political very, very quickly. And it was a little surprising to me how quickly it got political and how it got hijacked, because I think the essence of diversity and equity and inclusion had some really great roots in just being a decent human being and treating others with dignity and respect. But it went off the rails pretty quickly. Now, you had a front row seat in that world, because during that time period, you got selected to be a leader in DEI in a government organization, and got to see how you got pulled left and right. And to me, it was one of the most fascinating things to get to peek at as you were struggling with that. So tell us, what was that experience like, and it's kind of on its way out now in the corporate world for many reasons, but I'm afraid we're going to potentially throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I would say that it looks like that. If you're watching TV, it looks like that. But I think that the diversity, inclusion movement, if you will, it hasn't stopped. It just made people a little bit more aware. And I think that was part of what some people were trying to do. The reason why I got involved with it is because every time that something comes out, there's always going to be someone who makes it worse. And there was an opportunity. There was an opportunity, and I said, if there's an opportunity to make something right, to be ahead of it, to influence as many people as I can about the real reason why DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility existed, I want to be a part of that. Because there are individuals who said, well, this is just about black people, right?
Right.
Nope, this is just about women. Okay, the LGBTQ, that's what we're focusing on. No, we talked about so many different demographic factors, structural and organizational factors. When it comes to the cognitive ability of individuals, their physical ability of people, are we overlooking talent? Are we overlooking the right people in the right positions at our organizations? That's what organizations need to look at, and that's why diversity and inclusion was so important. People were saying, but I got passed over because I didn't fit the bill. I didn't look the way that I was supposed to look. In fact, we've had great conversations about, because obviously this diversity, it just has a title, but we have been working on this for years. It was just a lot more slower. When information didn't come out as fast as it did, right? Because you had to know somebody, right? Now that we have the internet and we have computer, we have people who are educated. They have the access to the information to say, no, I deserve that position. And you know what? And that was a part of the Great Resignation as well. And I didn't get it. And so because of that, I'm going to find an organization that values me. Now, there were some organizations that I'm going to say were performative. They would change their logo into, whatever flavor the month was for whatever special observance or cultural observance we had that month. Now, was that really helping the initiatives? No, but it looked good. The real the real impact happens in your actions, in that step. sometimes the first step. And leaders came back and they said, well, you know what? The leaders that I was able to work with, they said, well, Kishima, I'm not the subject matter expert in this field. I'm not sure if I am doing it right. I'm not sure if I'm doing it wrong. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to get in trouble.
Oh yeah.
Nobody wants to get in trouble. What do you think about that, Bob?
Well, I was thinking, so I gave a talk at a government agency, and a black female lesbian told me that she was felt marginalized at times, and was not given positions that she thought that she deserved. And she said this in a plenary session. And I said, well, I knew you were black and I knew you were a female. I did not know about the other thing, and I frankly don't care. And she says, okay. And I said, listen, if I'm running a plans team, for example, that's trying to solve a problem, I actually don't care if you're black, and I don't care if you're female, and I don't care if you're a lesbian. What I really want to know is, do you have the knowledge and skills and attributes I need to solve my problem? Can you contribute to the team? Where you got those knowledge, skills, and attributes is really irrelevant to me. If you happen to get them because you grew up on the Lower East Side of St. Louis, okay. If you got them because you lived someplace else, okay. I just need you to contribute to the team in a way that's meaningful. And oh, by the way, if you can see things differently than I do because of that background, great. Because I need somebody to shore up my blind spots.
Right.
And she said, I wish more leaders would speak the way you're speaking about this. And I got a lot of feedback that way. And then somebody said, well, you're able to say that in this environment because you're retired and nobody can do anything for you.
But you know, but there's other pieces to it as well. I feel like when you have individuals that don't get into the door because of something you can see, not something that they can do, that's a problem.
Yes.
But that honestly doesn't. I would say today, if we were having this same conversation 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was blatant for some organizations.
Without a doubt.
Others, not so much, right? And so I come back to the true image of a leader is how they handle adversity. And if you are a leader who has people on their team that know the job, and there is discussions happening about your person holding them back from their success and them contributing to the mission, then something is wrong with you. Right? Because you need to stand up and say, hey, look, that's my person. That's my teammate. That's my colleague. That's my subordinate, whatever you want to say. They are very qualified at what they do. There was a point where I was getting a little irritated and I would turn the news off because it was always, this is the first of the first of the first of the first, those first, you know what I'm talking about. But in my mind, I get it. But that should not predicate their qualifications, experience, and skills to do the job. They just happen to be a woman.
That's exactly right. And I still remember talking to another colonel who happened to be a black man, and that's exactly how we thought about it. Is he's a great leader, happens to be black, right? And it's like I think some of the press and the zeitgeist and the malcontents out there will detract from a leader and say, oh, well, maybe that was a demographic promotion. What a horrible thing to say.
Right. Undermining all of the qualifications and skills that it took for them to get there. Not to mention that because you point that out, not you, the individuals that point that out, that may just make it, that means that other people may have saw and point that out as well, made it a lot more harder for them to get there. There's a potential of that, happening.
Yeah, it's terrible. And when companies do promote people beyond their capabilities because they want to have some, I've heard it. I want some color on my face page on the internet, right? So you put somebody who's not qualified into a position, and then everybody, oh, here we go, and it reinforces the stereotype that there are demographic promotions, and so then it makes people question it, and it's like, well, no, that. Don't promote people beyond their capabilities, regardless of their demographic, regardless.
Right.
right?
But what happens if they do promote someone who's qualified that happens to fall into whatever affinity group, right, of choice, and then they're underutilized and
Oh
undervalued? So
yeah,
now
yeah.
you know that you were hired for the face, right? Because they didn't really care what skill sets you had. What they were looking for was a face.
So if DEI is used to expose that kind of mindset, that kind of thinking, those kinds of conundrums that companies can find themselves in, then it's serving an incredibly useful purpose. If it turns into an affirmative action program to place people of different demographics in positions that they did not earn, then you've destroyed the entire spirit of it.
Well, you know what was interesting? Because I remember I sat on a panel, we were talking about affirmative action. And, affirmative action didn't make companies do anything. Honestly, what it did was make companies report on what they were doing. So it was more of an accountability measure. So it was saying, oh, okay, well, tell me, so you're hiring people, this is great. And so out of all these positions that you have, what did your applicant pool look like? Those were the questions that were occurring on those forms that that EO the Equal Employment Agency was sending out, right? They were trying to understand, are you digging into the pools appropriately for those positions that you are looking to hire? So if you are, oh, this one was a touchy subject around this time as well. If you are hiring police officers, for example, right, and you are serving a predominantly underrepresented community, what did your applicant pool look like? Right? And I mean, and it had nothing to do, and I want to make sure that we are foot stomping the difference between today and before. And some of the issues that we dealt with 60 years ago, we're still talking about today, just in a different way.
I think the fact that we can have this conversation and there's going to be a bunch of people listening to it and we're okay with that
Right,
is huge progress,
right.
right? That's huge progress. And but one of the terms that got thrown around during the big debates over DEI and this wokeness that became part wrapped up in it, which was a horrible thing to get wrapped up into that, is this idea of white privilege.
Mm,
This hurt a lot of people's feelings. There are poor white people out there who don't feel privileged at all. They don't, and so they're angry over this term white privilege. And I think it became an emotional issue and not a useful one. But I think Brene Brown framed it in a way that I thought was really important. And she said, when I get up on stage, nobody questions whether or not I deserve to be on this stage. And that's a privilege. If somebody who doesn't look like me gets up on the stage and you spend the first 10 minutes of their presentation trying to figure out whether or not you should listen to them because you think they might be a demographic selection, that is a problem. So I have the privilege of not being questioned, and this other person doesn't.
right.
And when she said that, I went, oh, I think I understand this a little bit better now.
Yes, yes.
And I think that's important for leaders to understand and for don't just have a gut reaction to say, diversity and inclusion and equity are a bad thing and this term white privilege is all BS. Look at it with an open mind and consider why people came up with these terms and why these concepts resonate with a large portion of our population.
Right. And sometimes these are exhibited in microaggressions that people don't even, they don't realize that they're doing. So it could be unintentional. Some of them are intentional, some of them are unintentional, but we didn't grow up in the same household. A good example would be, for example, my husband and I'm light skinned, as some people would say. Colorism is a discussion point as well that happened during diversity inclusion. Uh, and my husband is dark skinned. And he says, when you are entering the room, everybody talks to you. But if I'm with you, no one looks at me. And then, because you're with me, they don't look at you either. I never realized that. Took him to point it out to me. So concerned about the issue. I called my dad, who's the same complexion as my husband, who was very much aware but never had that conversation with me. And I said, this is what, Kenneth's saying. That's my husband. And he says, yeah, because you light skin. And it's crazy because unless you have walked in that person's shoes, you are not looking at the same things. That was my reason for saying that story. So, and it would just be the same for me to tell a man how it is to walk in a female's shoes as I am trying to have a seat at the table. But I would say this, a man also told me, even though you have a seat at the table, depending on what your role is, you may not even need a seat because your job is to stand.
Mm. So when you and I first met, you were working with a company that you had a lot of respect for some of the people there, but there were some moments that you and other women in that organization did not feel like you were getting a fair shake. You told me once that it was really disheartening to have a great idea and to say it out loud in a room full of colleagues and to have it ignored, only to hear the same thing come out of a man's mouth and everybody agree with it and move forward with it as if it was their idea originally. Now, I chalk that up to being there's a couple of jerks that you're working with and that's a one-off that doesn't happen all the time, and you're going to have to forgive me for that response, but that was what it seemed like was probably a likely case until the next week when I heard it from another woman, and a week later I heard it from another woman, all professionals who are great at their jobs as you are, who felt minimized and cited that exact same thing, not because I told them the story, but because they said, this happened to me. Mm-hmm. And the fact that within 3 weeks it happened 3 times, or at least was relayed to me at least 3 times, that this was fairly common. And I said, if it's just Kishima having this problem, maybe Kashima's the problem. But it's not just Kishima having that problem. And oh, by the way, I don't think you have that problem nearly as much as you used to, because you have really come out of your shell in terms of insisting that they listen.
Well, so Bob, when you and I met, I had gotten pulled aside by some ladies I worked with. And they said, Kashima, you have this great position, and we just don't think that you're using your platform appropriately. And at first, I didn't really understand why they were telling me this, because I was like, I'm doing my job, right? But they weren't talking about my job. They were talking about my platform. Essentially, what they were saying is that you are in a position to clear the path for other women as well. And they said, if you are using your platform appropriately, then it would make it a lot more easier for us and other women to when we get to those positions, because we come back to being the first, right? Well, I didn't want to be the first. I just happened to be the one, right? That was there in that position, right? And other people saw it. But I didn't realize that these women expected more of me. And they were able, and I'm thankful that they were able to convey that. And I'm thankful that I was able to listen. Because then I started this journey on taking myself a little bit more seriously. Not just in the role that I play in the organization, but the platform that I have in the community. Because iron sharpens iron.
That it does, which is one of the reasons why I love to spend time with you. And we've actually exceeded the normal time for this podcast, but I don't care. I have been truly, the time has flown by. I just checked the clock and I said, well, my gosh, I have to try to figure out how to wrap this up. But it's so difficult to capture all of the wisdom and knowledge that that I get from our conversations. I did write down a few things. I loved when you said the aptitude and the attitude for the right people in the right seats, and that self awareness is key, and that leaders, strategic leaders, have to be intentional. Great wisdom there. It's also when we're talking about our culture, we have to be transparent. People need to understand what's expected of them and how they're doing against those standards. We have to manage expectations. We need to lead where you're planted, and you have to instill a teamwork mindset.
Absolutely.
There's so much more, and I'm going to enjoy listening back to this. We have so many conversations that we don't get to listen back on, but this time we get to because somebody's recorded it. Kishima, thank you so much. And what we didn't also talk about is that Dr. Kishima is also a now certified life coach. So if you are interested in getting coached or having Kishima take a look at your organization to assess the culture and give you some pointers on how you might make your culture better in your company, by all means, get a hold of Kashima. And you can find her through 5eaglesleadership.com because she is an affiliate coach with 5 Eagles Leadership. Thank you, thank you for being here. And thank you for what you do every single day to make the world a better place, Kashima.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Bob. It was my pleasure. Like you said, this is the one time where we actually recorded the conversation and people get just a hint into our coffee talks. It is absolutely difficult to stop because we talk about so many things that impact daily lives, not of just us, but also other people. So, of course, I welcome the feedback and comments because then how can we get better, right?
Right. Love it. Love it. Love it. Awesome. Well, again, thank you so much. And this will be one of my favorite episodes, I'm sure. Kashima Garcia, Dr. Kashima Garcia. And again, thank you. And we will see you soon.